For those found guilty of crimes involving minors, walking into prison is like walking into a war zone. They're instantly branded, and everyone around them knows exactly why they're there. Some barely last a week before someone takes matters into their own hands. Dorm moves become death warrants. Cell pairings spark ambushes, and ignored warnings end in seconds of chaos. These are 20 inmates who died in custody after convictions involving minors. Number 20, David Bob and Graham de Luis-Conti. At the prison in Corcoran, California, Jonathan Watson had already been locked up for life when staff made a move that would change everything. They placed him in a dorm-style unit with 2 men who were in for crimes against children under the age of 14. 6 days later, on January 16, 2020, just after 2:30 in the afternoon, Watson snapped. An incident occurred inside the dorm area involving 48-year-old David Bob and 62-year-old Graham de Luis-Conti. Bob died same day, while de Luis-Conti passed away 3 days later in a hospital. Watson didn't try to hide. He calmly walked to prison staff and admitted what he had done. In a letter later sent to reporters, Watson said he had actually warned a counselor earlier that day that he might do something violent. What set him off, he claimed, was one of the men sitting in a shared space watching PBS Kids, which Watson saw as a direct taunt. In his words, he believed he was doing everyone a favor. Records confirmed that both men were serving life sentences, and when the Inspector General reviewed the case, they found no prison staff faced discipline for ignoring Watson's warnings or the questionable housing decision that put them together. Number 19, Andrew Alexander Thompson. In Milton, Florida, at the Blackwater River Correctional Facility, 35-year-old Andrew Alexander Thompson had only just begun serving a 45-year sentence handed down in March 2022. His charges included 12 counts tied to illegal material involving minors and another count related to an additional prohibited offense. But he wouldn't last long inside. On July 27th of that year, officers found Thompson lying face down on his bunk, showing signs of a medical emergency. His cellmate, 41-year-old Angel Velez, had already gone to a guard and said Thompson. When a nurse came to check, Velez stated he was responsible. Investigators documented the circumstances inside the cell, and by February 2023, authorities filed a second-degree. Number 18, John J. Geoghan. John J. Geoghan had once been a Boston priest ordained back in 1962, but behind the collar, he carried a long record of offenses against children. For years, the church quietly moved him from parish to parish, even as accusations piled up. In 2002, everything came out when the Boston Globe Spotlight investigation exposed how many victims there really were. That same year, Geoghan was convicted of offenses involving a minor and sentenced to 9 to 10 years in state prison. But his time behind bars ended violently. On August 23, 2003, inside Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Massachusetts, another inmate named Joseph Druce secured his cell door and carried out a planned act. Medical reports cited fatal injuries. Prosecutors revealed Druce had prepared in advance. In January 2006, a jury convicted him of first-degree homicide, and he is serving life with no parole. Number 17, Mario Waters. Mario Waters was 35 years old when he entered the federal prison system, and the case that put him there was one of the most disturbing to come out of Arkansas in years. Back in 2018, a 6-year-old girl was taken to Arkansas Children's Hospital and found to have multiple infections. In a recorded interview, she identified both Mario Waters and another man, DeMarcus George, and described what happened. Investigators dug deeper and matched her story to a hotel room rented that March by her mother's boyfriend. Lab results indicated overlaps consistent with the investigation. Prosecutors charged them with conspiracy to engage in trafficking involving a minor, and in federal court, both men were convicted. George received life in prison in 2022, and Waters was sentenced to life the following April. On April 21, 2023, Waters was processed into the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, to serve out his sentence. Less than a year later, in the early morning hours of January 15, 2024, Staff responded to what was described as a confrontation inside the prison. At 12:20 a.m., they found Waters unresponsive. He was rushed to a local hospital, but he was pronounced that day. Number 16, Clinton Don Simpson. Clinton Don Simpson's downfall was one of Texas's most talked about cases. He had once been a preacher at Hazlitt Church of Christ and ran a backyard train ride called Mr. Don's Whistle Stop. By 2007, parents of a 3-year-old came forward with allegations, and prosecutors eventually stacked up 10 counts of aggravated offense against the minors. Simpson spent years declared incompetent, cycling through a state hospital starting in 2009, before finally being returned to jail in 2018 for a new evaluation. On November 7th of that year at the Lon Evans Corrections Center, Simpson was housed in the medical unit with 42-year-old David Faustino Flores. Within minutes of being placed together, an incident occurred. Officers reported they intervened roughly a minute after it began, but by then Simpson had already suffered devastating injuries. He was rushed to John Peter Smith Hospital and died just after 3 in the morning. An affidavit later described a rapid escalation observed on video while an officer and 2 nurses were just steps away. The Texas Rangers took over the case and authorities filed a homicide charge. Number 15, Nelson Joseph Sanderson. Nelson Joseph Sanderson was 79 years old when his story came to a violent end inside Century Correctional Institution in Escambia County, Florida. Back in 2016, he had been convicted in Lee County of crimes against a minor under 12 and handed 2 life sentences. State records officially listed him as a designated offender, and he was sent to live out his days in prison. But on August 17, 2020, officers reported chaos in the dorm area. Sanderson had been involved in an assault and was pronounced dead right there in the prison. At first, officials kept the attacker's identity quiet while the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the Inspector General launched an investigation. It took 3 years before prosecutors named 26-year-old Markel Sawyer as the man responsible. In March 2023, a jury found Sawyer guilty, and he was sentenced to 30 years behind bars. Court files later revealed the incident occurred in a dorm bathroom. When questioned, Sawyer gave bizarre explanations, even mentioning the Illuminati. Number 14, Robert Munger. Robert Munger had only just begun serving a massive sentence when his life ended inside prison walls. In December of 2019, the 70-year-old was handed a minimum of 43 years after 4 separate trials across 2 years. His record showed multiple felony convictions, including charges involving illegal content and other offenses involving minors. Just months later, in June 2020, he was involved in a physical altercation inside Airway Heights Correction Center near Spokane, Washington. His cellmate was 25-year-old Shane Goldsby. Security cameras captured the encounter in a common area. Officers pulled him away, but by then the damage was done. Munger later died at a hospital. Goldsby later told reporters he lost control after learning that Munger had been involved in a case affecting his younger sister years earlier. That revelation sparked outrage and confusion over why the 2 men had ever been housed together in the first place. Prosecutors filed charges, and though it began as first-degree, Goldsby pleaded guilty to second-degree homicide. In August 2021, a judge added almost 25 more years to his sentence. In court, Goldsby faced Munger's family and apologized, but nothing could erase the fact that a man who had just started a 4-decade prison term was dead within months of entering custody. Number 13, Theodore Dyer. Theodore Dyer had been living in the Grand Haven area of Michigan before his crimes finally caught up with him. In January of 2014, he began serving a 25 to 50-year sentence for first-degree criminal involving a minor under 13. That fall, on October 29th, he was housed at Saginaw Correctional Facility when everything came to an end. Guards found the 67-year-old unresponsive after a violent incident inside his cell. Investigators quickly treated it as a homicide and turned their attention to his cellmate Stephen D. Sanderson. Court records later revealed Sanderson told police that Dyer would not stop talking about his case, and eventually he snapped. He admitted to striking Dyer before the situation escalated. Sanderson was already serving life for a 1991 homicide, so prison was nothing new to him. In February of 2015, he pled guilty to second-degree homicide, and that April, he was sentenced to another life term, this one with the possibility of parole. Number 12. DeAndre Austin. DeAndre Austin had been behind bars in California for more than a decade when his story came to a sudden and violent end. Back in October of 2008, he entered the state prison system after being sentenced in Contra Costa County to life for multiple felony counts involving a minor under 14. His record listed continuous abuse and other related offenses, and by the time he arrived at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, he was considered a long-term inmate with no chance of release. On October 14, 2020, officers responded to a man-down call at 5:40 in the evening. Inside his cell, they found the 46-year-old Austin unresponsive. Despite efforts to revive him, he was pronounced dead less than an hour later at 6:30. His cellmate, Rodney Jordan, was immediately segregated while the Amador County District Attorney and the Office of the Inspector General were notified. The FBI was not called in since Mule Creek is a state facility. Number 11. David Kever. In Florida, David Kever had a history of crimes against minors dating back to the 1990s. He was serving 8 years and 9 months for failing to register as required by law. At Santa Rosa Correctional Institution in Milton, he was placed in a cell with Jimmy Ray Carruthers. Just after midnight on July 1, 2019, officers found Kever lying on the floor. Investigators later revealed that Carruthers inflicted fatal neck trauma. On October 19, 2021, a Santa Rosa County jury convicted Carruthers of second-degree homicide, and the judge immediately sentenced him to mandatory life in prison. Number 10. David Oseas Ramirez. David Oseas Ramirez was already serving life after a 2013 conviction for offenses involving a minor under 12. In late July 2019, he was back at the county jail for court proceedings and shared a cell with 43-year-old Paul Dixon, who was already serving life for a homicide committed in 1993. On July 30th, officers were called to their cell and found Ramirez unresponsive after a violent incident in the cell. Dixon was charged with second-degree homicide. At the time, he had been returned to the jail for a resentencing hearing under new juvenile life rulings, but the incident ended any chance of that. Local news and court records later confirmed every detail of how it unfolded inside that cell. Number 9. Liam Dean. Liam Dean's case shocked England in 2017. He admitted at Leeds Crown Court that October that he had lost his temper during the night and admitted responsibility for the death of his 2-day-old daughter while the baby's mother slept. Dean was only 22 years old, and the court gave him a life sentence with a minimum of 10 years before he could even ask for parole. But just weeks later, on November 12th, officers at HMP Leeds, also known as Armley Prison, found Dean dead inside his cell. Another inmate, 29-year-old John Westland, was arrested within days and charged. In court the following year, jurors heard he used a sharp object and inflicted fatal injuries. The judge explained that Westland wrongly thought Dean was locked up for time, when in fact his conviction was for killing his newborn child. On August 2, 2018, Westland was found guilty of homicide and sentenced to life with a minimum of 19 years. Number 8. Anthony Palma. In 1997, 8-year-old Kirsten Hatfield disappeared from her home in Midwest City, Oklahoma. For 20 years, her case remained unsolved until new DNA testing finally broke it wide open. Investigators discovered the evidence tied directly to Anthony Palma, who, shockingly, had lived just 2 houses away from Kirsten's family at the time. Her remains were never recovered, but in October 2017, a jury found Palma guilty of first-degree homicide, and a judge sentenced him the next month to life without parole. That sentence was supposed to last forever, but it didn't. On January 11, 2019, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister, staff conducting a routine evening check found Palma unresponsive in his maximum security cell around 7:30. Prison medical staff tried but could not revive him, and a doctor officially pronounced him dead at 8:55 that night. The Department of Corrections quickly confirmed they believed his cellmate was responsible. Within days, officials identified the suspect as 35-year-old Raymond Pilado, a man already serving time for multiple homicide cases and a separate shooting. Reports stated he was present in the cell when officers found Palma's body. Number 7. Robert E. Cole. Robert E. Cole had once been trusted as a youth volleyball coach in Placer County, California, but his past came crashing down in 2019 when he was convicted on a stack of disturbing charges. Court filings described offenses involving multiple minors spanning several locations and incidents. For that, a judge handed him life with the possibility of parole, and Cole, then 48 years old, was sent into the state prison system. On April 4, 2025, his story ended inside Mule Creek State Prison in Ione. Officers making early morning rounds at 6:30 found him unresponsive in his cell. They tried to save him, but by 6:43 he was gone. Investigators quickly called it a homicide. His cellmate, 36-year-old Justin P. Welsh, was pulled from the unit and placed in segregation while the Amador County District Attorney, the prison's investigative unit, the Office of the Inspector General, and the county coroner took over. Number 6. Juan Villanueva. Juan Villanueva's death happened in 2023 at North Kern State Prison in Delano. He had only just arrived on February 2nd after being sentenced out of Los Angeles County to life with the possibility of parole for aggravated assault of a minor under 14. Less than a month later, on February 24th, an officer doing a morning check at 8:49 found Villanueva, 53 years old, lying unresponsive in his cell. Staff rushed him to the prison's treatment area and tried CPR, but at 9:03 he was pronounced dead. His cellmate was none other than Ramon Escobar, a convicted serial killer, already serving life without parole for multiple homicides in Los Angeles County and Harris County, Texas. Weeks later, the Kern County coroner confirmed Villanueva's death was caused by strangulation. Prosecutors quickly filed new charges of first-degree homicide against Escobar, adding special circumstances tied to his earlier killings. Number 5. Augustine Duran. Augustine Duran had barely set foot inside California's prison system when his story ended. Convicted in Los Angeles County for offenses involving a minor under 14, he was given 55 years to life and transferred to Wasco State Prison on July 2, 2018. Just 5 days later, on the evening of July 7th, officers inside Facility B's day room saw a disturbance break out. 19-year-old inmate Andres Ayon was physically assaulting Duran while other prisoners dropped to the ground as alarms blared. Ayon refused to stop, so officers intervened and restrained him. Duran was rushed to the prison's treatment area, then airlifted at 8:23 that night to a hospital outside the facility. Despite the quick response, he died the next day, July 8th at 4:48 in the afternoon. Officials confirmed the incident, explained that Duran had only just arrived at the reception center, and immediately notified the Inspector General and Kern County prosecutors. Number 4. Colin Hatch. Colin Hatch was one of Britain's most notorious offenders, already serving a life term for the 1993 case resulting in the death of 7-year-old Sean Williams in North London. That case was committed while Hatch was out on license from an earlier conviction involving another boy, and a judge declared he should never walk free again. On February 22, 2011, inside HMP Full Sutton near York, another inmate, Damien Folks, decided to act. Folks barricaded Hatch's cell and attacked him inside the cell. He warned guards he would hurt Hatch if they tried to come in, giving himself time to carry out the act. When officers finally gained entry, Hatch was already dead, and Folks had prepared makeshift items to use if interrupted. Prosecutors later accepted a manslaughter plea on grounds of diminished responsibility and also charged him for a separate attack on Ian Huntley. On October 5, 2011, a judge sentenced Folks to life with a minimum of 20 years, detailing in open court how carefully the killing had been planned, down to the barricade and the measures he had prepared in advance. Number 3. Ashley Bropho. Ashley James Bropho had just pled guilty to taking a 9-year-old from a park in Doubleview. He had not even been sentenced yet when he was moved into Huckle Prison, Western Australia's main facility for processing men before long-term placement. On the morning of March 9, 2023, guards found the 40-year-old unresponsive in his cell. Another inmate, 43-year-old Evan James Martin, immediately admitted he was responsible. By March of the next year, Martin stood in court, pled guilty, and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 21 years before parole. The judge made it clear the justice system would not excuse vigilante acts inside prison. What made Martin's involvement more troubling was his history. He had already attacked someone inside prison back in 2020 and even mentioned that earlier assault when confessing to Bropho's death. Court hearings later revealed that red flags about Martin's mental health had been raised before the incident, but nothing was done. Number 2. Richard Huckle. Richard William Huckle had been one of the most notorious offenders in the UK. In June of 2016, he was sentenced to 22 life terms with a minimum of 25 years after being convicted on 71 counts tied to crimes against children. Investigators had uncovered more than 20,000 images tracing his online activity through a joint operation by Task Force Argos in Queensland, Australia, and UK authorities. That work not only caught Huckle but also exposed a wider hidden network. On October 13, 2019, while serving his sentence at Full Sutton Prison in East Yorkshire, guards discovered the 33-year-old dead in his cell. Another inmate, Paul Fitzgerald, admitted responsibility. By November of 2020, Fitzgerald was convicted and sentenced to life with a minimum of 34 years. Number 1. Cesar Israel Pastrana. Cesar Israel Pastrana's story played out in Georgia. Back in 2012, he pleaded guilty in Cobb County to multiple charges after investigators uncovered 9 victims, most of them boys he had met through a North Star Church youth program. Years earlier, he had already been banned from Barber Middle School after volunteering there. His plea deal left him with a life sentence, and he was sent to Hancock State Prison in Sparta, Georgia. On March 13, 2020, Pastrana was caught up in a violent altercation behind bars. Medical staff rushed to help, but his injuries were too severe. He was transported to a local hospital and pronounced dead at 12:15 in the afternoon. State corrections officials immediately treated it as a suspected homicide and called in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to handle the case. Coverage revisited his original 2012 case, where an overnight church event first triggered the investigation that revealed more victims and eventually led to his guilty plea. By the time he was killed, Pastrana had been serving his life term for 8 years, and his death once again highlighted the violent realities of prison life, even for those already facing punishment that was meant to last forever. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.